18th century people were not like us with regard to change. Modern people see change as a good thing, whereas pre-modern people did not. They viewed change negatively or at least suspiciously. These divergent attitudes towards change are embedded in the term revolution, which modern Americans use differently than did 18th century Americans. So by revolution, modern people mean a fundamental change that moves us from an old system to a new, different, and better system, okay, in political institutions, social customs, or technology. Okay, see, for example, the Industrial Revolution, Market Revolution, the Sexual Revolution, agricultural, financial, the AI revolution. So revolution means fundamental and radical change and destroying something old and replacing it with something new and better. If you drew a diagram of a revolution, what it looks like, it would look like an arrow leading from point A to point B. Okay, so forward and upward. Um, but it's obvious that if you think of where the word comes from, the etymology, it's obvious that the word revolution comes from the word revolve. Okay, so a diagram of a revolution should therefore trace a circle. Okay, so not a straight line from A to B, but a 360-degree movement that leads you from point A back to point A, back to the starting point, like a revolving door or the Earth's revolution around the sun. So when a revolving door or the Earth completes one revolution, it is back at the starting point once again. Okay, so a revolution is a reset, or it's a restoration of the original setting. So, as you can see, it's evident that the word revolution has retained its original meaning in the field of mechanics, as in a revolving door or an engine's revolutions per minute. But it did not retain its original meaning in the field of politics. The transformation and modernization of the word revolution, again, in the realm of politics and society, took place during the French Revolution and because of the French Revolution. The the French Revolution destroyed, burned down, and beheaded the old system and created a brand new system of government in France with radical change in every part of public and private life. New political institutions, new political leaders and power brokers, new rituals and titles, a new calendar, and just new social and political practices. And and because the French Revolution was so monumental and influential all over the world, that is the image that again, destruction of the old and creation of something new. That is the image that modern people now have for what a revolution looks like. Okay, so that's why we draw it now as a straight arrow from point A to point B. But before the French Revolution, back in the 17th and 18th century, and during the American Revolution, the term revolution described what it always did, not the creation of a new order, but the restoration of the original order, a return to square one, to the way things used to be. So, for example, when when the English rebelled against their king in 1688 in what they called the Glorious Revolution, they described their rebellion as a revolution because this term conferred legitimacy on armed revolt against the lawful ruler. And so the term revolution signaled to everyone that the rebels were not radical agents of change. They were traditionalists working to restore the good old order that the king had corrupted. The rebels of 1776 signaled the same sentiment. They advertised it by embracing the term American Revolution, but they also advertised it by spelling it out in diplomatic documents like the Olive Branch Petition and in their own domestic discourse with one another. For example, in the Westmoreland County Resolves, 1775 already, they wrote, "We do not wish or desire any innovations, but only that things may be restored to and go on in the same way as before the era of the Stamp Act, when Boston grew great and America was happy." Okay, so all we want is to return things to the way they used to be. Um, and moreover, it's evident that the British government understood this. Okay, that the British too understood that this was the meaning and purpose of the revolution in real time. And we know this because when the British kind of finally had enough and were willing to deal with the Americans, they approached the United States Congress in 1778 with a peace plan. And in this peace plan, they offered a return to the constitutional condition of 1763. Okay, so what it shows is that they were willing to offer Americans in 1778 what they had refused to grant in 1775, 76, and that is the restoration of the old order back in 1763, before the constitutional changes of the Sugar Act, Stamp Act, Declaratory Act, the Townshend Duties, the Tea Act, the Quebec Act, and the Coercive Acts. Okay. Now, the British concession, of course, came too late after too much blood had been spilled, so the war continued to its happy conclusion. Um, but it shows that Americans understood what they were doing and the British understood what they were doing. Excuse me. Americans had tried to restore the good old imperial order within the British Empire for a decade before the outbreak of the war, with their petitions and their demonstrations. When that failed, they broke away, but they did the same thing. They restored that good and old order only outside the British Empire through the first American Constitution, the Articles of Confederation. And the results are visible. When Americans won their independence, they wrote down as their first constitution the unwritten rules that they had lived by for generations under the old imperial structure. In those good old days, the British Empire was a loose confederation of self-governing colonies. Each colony governed itself, but but followed imperial instruction and leadership in matters of defense and foreign trade. Under the Articles of Confederation, the United States looked quite similarly to that old British Empire. It was a loose confederation of self-governing states. Each state governed itself, but followed US instruction and leadership in matters of defense and foreign trade. The, the first constitution, again, ratified at the moment of military victory. Therefore, we can see how that first constitution articulates the original purpose of the American resistance movement to restore the old and good imperial order back before the era of the Stamp Act, when Boston grew great and America was happy.